Hello, everybody. My name is Jasper Decker. I'm an associate design director at Smart Design. Smart Design is a strategic design company that helps people live better and work smarter. We work together with companies and organizations to help them innovate and existing products and think of new products. And I'm very excited to welcome you to our Smart Salon. Tonight's discussion is on the subject of mobility, and I am joined this evening by three experts on this topic, and my co-host, Vasily Romanov, a senior design engineer at Smart Design. So this salon came about as a result of our work in the mobility sector over the years. I think we started like 15 years ago on reimagining the New York City taxi that is still on the roads today, which is very cool. And recently we launched a case study on a project we did together with Ford in the last mile delivery space. That's available on our website today. But besides those things, when we look at mobility today, it's actually really fascinating what's happening. There's a lot of things happening. A couple of examples is electrification of our cars, our buses, and our motorcycles. That's taking huge steps lately. There are rapid advancements in AI and autonomous driving. Governments are rethinking urban planning and infrastructure around equity and inclusivity. The US has the infrastructure bill right now that's really having its effect. We see micro-mobility initiatives all around us, like bike share systems and personal electric scooters and all other sort of services that allow people to get around in different ways. Our mobile and wearable technology is almost ubiquitous, and they're all talking together, and it's quite a fascinating time to work in the mobility space. And of course, this list goes on and on and on. So lots to talk about. Let's talk about our panel. So our three guests today spend a lot of time thinking about these issues and these exciting developments and are each really doing interesting things in their own right. And what I'm going to do is ask them to introduce themselves, talk a little bit about their background, about themselves, what they do in their lives and at work, and a project they're working on and they're very excited about. Henry, I'm going to start with you. Would you mind introducing yourself to everybody?
Absolutely. Thank you, Jasper. Thank you to Smart Design. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Again, Henry Greenwich. I'm the Executive Vice President at Tusk Strategies. I've been in mobility for over 10 years now. You sort of lose count as the years go by, working on different aspects. I worked in the federal government. I was in the Obama administration, where I worked at the U.S. Department of Transportation, worked at the White House Office of Management and Budget, the transportation branch. So I got to see how the funds were allocated. And then I've worked on transportation at the local level and at tech companies. At Tusk, I get the wonderful opportunity to work with cities and other governments, as well as startups on how they can deploy innovative technology. I'm working on a number of exciting projects right now. I know you said to talk about one. I'm going to diverge a little bit and talk about a few of them.
Okay.
Sorry. So first, I have to, shameless plug. Today, Tusk Strategies launched an innovative new transportation and infrastructure practice. And part of the impetus behind it was the opportunity that the infrastructure bill provides. Simply, this is the largest amount of funds that local governments will receive and have received in a long time. And there are tremendous opportunity to rethink about what we consider infrastructure and what it means for everyday people. So I'm excited about that. Another project that I wanted to mention was a group that I work closely with called EV Hybrid Noir. And they're an advocacy organization that is sort of the largest representative organization for diverse e-mobility drivers. And so they are focused on electric vehicles and how they can be deployed in diverse communities. And in November, they released a public policy toolkit. Now, in the policy world, you see these policy toolkits that come out every couple of months. I think this one is different. This one is written by people of color, and it's written for policymakers to really give them the tools that they need to figure out how to deploy electric vehicles in diverse communities. And we haven't seen that before. The thesis is sort of that those who get hit hardest by climate and health concerns, they should experience the technology first because they have the most to benefit. And it gives you strategies on ways in which to do that, including outreach, which is critically important. The last project I did want to mention was a tech company that I'm working with called Stack Mobility. And what excites me about Stack is it's really a disruptor for the parking space. Now, cities are moving away from cars, which I actually agree with. And I think to a large measure, Stack agrees with as well. What's interesting about it is Stack is combining a way to sort of save space, but also electrify vehicles by providing charging. It helps reduce congestion and provides critical charging needs. I like it because it combines sustainability and really just smart design. And I think that's what today is all about. So really exciting projects. And I agree with you, Jasper. It's a wonderful time to be in the mobility space. But I love the fact that we can reimagine what the existing infrastructure and what the existing transportation landscape looks like.
Yeah, fantastic. You're a busy man, Henry. Thanks so much. Next up is Keith Kirkland.
Hello, everyone. My name is Keith Kirkland, and I'm one of the co-founders of WearWorks. And at WearWorks, which is a haptic platform company, we build products and experiences that communicate information through touch. And so our very first product, Wayband, is a haptic navigation app that pairs with an optional wristband that gently guides the user to a destination using only vibration without the need for any visual or audio feedback. And back in 2017, we used this technology to help the first person who was blind run 15 miles of the New York City Marathon without any sighted assistance. So in our world, we work a lot around the space of accessibility and what does accessibility look like? And what does a city look like? Mainly from the point of view of someone who's blind or visually impaired. But also one of the biggest things I think that we've learned in the space is in designing for the blind and visually impaired space, they don't want a device for blind and visually impaired people. Like they want a device that everyone else is using as well, no stigma, but is optimized for their experience. And so we're looking at this way of accessible information and what does that look like? And ultimately, our core belief is that, we took sight and sound into the digital revolution and we left every other sense behind. And touch is right on the forefront to bring in a more accessible and inclusive way of delivering information because more human beings have access to the sense and over more parts of the body. So we're really excited about the future of mobility and super excited to be part of this conversation. Thanks for the team at Smart Design.
Cool, we're very excited to have you. Thank you. And then last but not least, our third panelist, Faiza. Tell us about yourself.
Sure, thanks, Jasper. My name is Faiza. I've been working on several machine learning topics in the past 10 years. And 5 years ago, I joined Mercedes-Benz. So I've been working with the company for the past few years. I started with autonomous driving. So I've been involved on different machine learning related topic in autonomous driving space. And then in the past couple of years, I've been working on connected vehicles, where I'm basically leading a team that its main focus is providing AI-driven user experience for our customers. Maybe talking a little bit about our products, we try to create a user interface that learns from customer behavior and offers our customers all relevant functions in direct access in any situation and at the most convenient time. So basically, we design products that provide a more holistic, personalized, and intelligent driving experience, and we try to use AI to enhance the driving experience for our customers. That's our main focus. Yeah, that's a little bit about myself and what I'm working on now.
Cool. Yeah, it's exciting. And just as a side note, and correct me if I'm wrong, what you're working on is actually on the market, right? It exists in cars today, like the EQS, I believe. And
that's correct. Yes. Yeah. Yes. So we have a few products that have were launched last year, and EQS is using some of them. That's right. And yeah, I mean, it's basically our target is existing Mercedes models.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's exciting. Good. Okay. Well, thank you all for your intros. Before we get started, a little housekeeping. So for everybody attending, there is a Q&A box in the Zoom window at the bottom. So if you have any questions, you can drop them in there. Vasily will be keeping tabs on that, and towards the end of the panel session, we will have time to bring up some of these questions to the panelists themselves. So feel free to drop any questions you might have in the Q&A. There's also a chat window, any sort of comments, or if the panelists themselves may have any links they want to share with everybody participating today, that's where they will appear. So this session is being recorded, and a summary along with all those links I mentioned before will be available in, say, a week or so on the Smart Design website. So let's get started. First, I want to talk with Henry. When we talked earlier, you mentioned how your career had like a lot of different parts to it, and you worked with the government and advised the government. You also worked with startups and commercial companies. And I was interested that you mentioned how that sort of richness in your experience really helps you reimagine infrastructure. And then especially when it comes around inclusivity, so everybody gets to benefit. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, and then how you reimagine that infrastructure around that topic of inclusivity?
Sure. I think so. I think I've had a fantastic career. I've thoroughly enjoyed some of the jobs that I've had, and so I've worked at the federal level. I've worked at the city level, and I've worked in the private sector as well. I think for me, the biggest lesson that I learned is just how important engagement and outreach is when doing this work in each of those levels, especially when you think about inclusivity. We all know that, transportation was sort of built on the foundation of the housing infrastructure, right? They needed to figure out ways in which people could move from home to work. But we also know about the inequities that have been pervasive throughout housing. And so when you think about engagement at cities, at the city level and the federal level, well, I'll give you more concrete examples. When I was at the federal government, we had the wonderful opportunity of creating grant programs that would get at local governments. And what we did was we created programs based on feedback that we heard. Now, often what would happen is we didn't hear from some communities. We didn't do proactive engagement. We didn't go to them. We relied on the information that was coming to us. Same thing at the city level. We focused on policies based on people that were engaging directly with us. And we realized that we were missing major pieces of the pie. I've been fortunate to work with great leadership that recognize that. And so I learned the importance of going out and doing outreach and bringing that back and feeding that information into the process. And I think that's what we need now. I think the times allow us to be more intentional about how to incorporate that feedback. For instance, we can use the term equity now. When I was in the federal government, we didn't use that term. I worked for Secretary Anthony Fox in the Obama administration, and we were doing equity programs, but we certainly didn't call it that. And in my opinion, it was partly because the country wasn't ready to acknowledge what it was. We had programs called Ladders for Opportunity, and really it was the basis for what Secretary Pete Buttigieg is doing now with respect to equity. But all of that is necessary when we're talking about engagement and outreach and making sure that you are designing for everyone and being inclusive. And so as we think about what infrastructure looks like in the future, it will be very different because we're going out to actually proactively engage. I can think of one tech company in particular where I thought they did a fantastic job of engaging with the public and incorporating that feedback in their business plan. And that was actually Revel e-mopeds in New York. To be honest, I think they were shut down because what they found was people were stealing the e-mopeds. But what they were able to do is go out, talk to the community, teach them about safety, talk to them about what the needs were. Why was it important to have this transportation solution? And they were able to deploy in those areas and provide meaningful ways to get to and from work, especially during the pandemic. That's what we talk about inclusive. They didn't just deploy their technology. So as we continue on, I think there are tremendous opportunities to do just that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I fully agree. Yeah, I definitely see and remember the bright blue scooters zipping around, and they've extended now. So they're doing great things. I agree. And that's a great example of how inclusivity can be actually addressed, from both sides. So talking about inclusivity and thinking about, technologies or in this case, vehicles, Faiza, this is a question for you. Even on an infrastructure level, of course, it's very important to keep everybody in mind and give access to everybody. But then when it comes to our actual vehicles, I think inclusivity plays a big role as well. And what is the role there of artificial intelligence and especially autonomous driving when it comes to inclusivity?
Yeah, sure. Well, it's about basically finding ways to making it easier for everyone to basically an easier transportation for everyone. So it doesn't have to be about driving per se, but let's say that for people with certain disabilities or elderly who might not be able to drive easily, or it might not be safe for them, it's to find solutions to enhance the safety for them and making it easier for them. So right now we have, let's say, lane keeping options or these kind of things that are in basically driver assistant options, but we can add more. We can reduce the part that driver is involved in driving and do it for them. Autonomous driving is at the end of the spectrum, obviously, and it's where you are not driving at all, you're not involved, but it's a gradual growth to that point. And we slowly increase the vehicle part and less reliable on less reliable on the driver itself. So for those people who might have concerns about their transportation, this is going to be way easier. The vehicle could park itself. It could find a parking spot. It could, so that you don't have to worry about those kind of things. Or for let's say, the locations that might not be accessible for wheelchair. So it's able to find those locations. So all of these could be solved by AI. And throughout the drive, we can learn more about the passengers. What is their health situation? Can we do anything about it? Can we call the ambulance? Or all these things could be handled by monitoring the whatever happens inside the vehicle and outside to ensure safety of the not only driver but also passengers.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating how we already sort of know the roadmap, like where we want to push our cars and what role they can play for people, our society, and as you said, like also people around the car even. And I understand it's not all there yet, and I know some of these things you talked about are. So it's exciting times, and it's fun to look at that entire spectrum all the way to like you don't need to drive anymore, no need to have a license. And that's really, really powerful. So Keith, kind of talking about inclusivity and making sure that everybody can participate in society. When we talked earlier, you had a vision also on like how Wayband can help a particular user group there to bring them back into society. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. And so, one of the things is, when we first started on this journey, we were really just trying to get people out of their phones and back into the real world. It's kind of like we saw that all digital technologies kind of like pulled information from reality, but like very few of them gave information back to like so that you can do something in the real world with. And so we were really looking at like, how can I get this information but not be glued to the screen? And so it started off as a very simple prose, and when we initially started, we talked to people who were mainly around sighted, like travelers, here's a new opportunity, travel around Japan and don't need to understand the street signs or the address systems, like go to Romania and like navigate complex communist neighborhoods like you live here, right? It was like kind of an amazing experience where you could show up and just not be a tourist in a place that you've never been before. But what we found is that like people had a hard time understanding like what the value of it was for them. Like most of the sighted community at the time couldn't see that looking at a map was even a problem. And so, after about 6 months of chasing that market, we, kind of had a lucky break where we ended up, meeting someone from the Texas School for the Blind and Visually Impaired at South by Southwest. And, he was like, you have to take this to the blind school right now. And so we run to the school and all of a sudden we realize like the dramatic difference when a person who was blind or visually impaired tried on our device, like there was this look in their eyes that would just like light up, like, I know which way is the right way to go. And I think we kind of walked out of that experience unanimously, like, okay, yes, this is the most challenging use case we could probably ever think, because we didn't even know haptic navigation would work on like people who were sighted yet. We were figuring it all out. Yeah. So it's like, we're going to jump into like blind navigation, and GPS is crappy and maps are crappy. And like, but this is where we're going because we just saw like, wow, like from the point of view of the work that we're doing and like, it's giving it to the people who understand it the most as our first customers and evangelists. It's like, it just felt so clear that like, how could you do this for anything else?
Yeah. It's super interesting. And I love how, those little moments, sometimes in projects we have that too, when we're talking to people, and it's like this eureka moment is like, wow, this is so beneficial, nothing we actually talked about. And that, I guess, is, back to Henry's point, the power and the value of like reaching out and talking to your people that end up using your product or that you didn't even, know existed. So there's this one thing is like, okay, they can now navigate the world, but what does that mean apart from now being included? What does that mean to the visually impaired to have that ability, especially when it comes to like their health and well-being?
Yeah. So like, like when most 82% of people like transition into blindness, which means that they had some form of much better sight, and then now are dealing with the situation where that is gone. And so what we found is that in the stories that we've told is like a lot of people, they shrink their lives. They still go to work and they still go to the doctor's office, but they don't go to the bar and hang out with their friends. They're not going to like meet you at this new coffee shop to have that new dessert. It's just too much mental work and anxiety around being out and navigating someplace new and potentially getting lost. And of course, like there's a very real danger that is dangerous depending on what your sight levels are. And so what we're really giving people is like independence and freedom, and it's a wonderful thing because it's like we don't talk so much about that part of it, but like every time we give it to someone, like their thing is like, wow, this gives me the mental space to just kind of like feel like I have extra eyes on my shoulder watching me, and like I feel free. I feel like I can do this by myself without needing to have someone here be present with me. And I think that like that independence is a big part of the loss that a lot of people, especially in the disability community, they have to end up giving up at some points because of the challenges that they face.
Yeah, that's a huge
or more because of the way we design the world, in lieu of the challenges that they face is probably a better terminology for it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So it is really interesting how that, we started with inclusion and that now comes to like our general just health, well-being, like physical as well as mental. Faiza, when it comes to that health and well-being, you mentioned like you monitor and the car and Mercedes-Benz cars of the future will be better at that. And then what are ways that they can take care of their occupants?
So I mean, looking at what we have now, we have like right now, I mean, a few things that I mentioned about like the driver assistant. It not only involves like controlling the vehicle, but also understanding the driver. So is the driver sleepy, or is he, I don't know, are they for some reason distracted, and then how we can control it, how we can control the situation. Let's say that they have a kid in the back seat and they're distracted for some reason, how we can keep somehow manage and handle the situation. So this is about what we have now. What is and it's not only about that, but also their mental health. We have a good understanding of, like, let's say, where people are going on a daily basis. Are they stressed after work, or would they like to listen to a music and feel better? And so these are a few things that we can do now. And then we can always improve that in the future. Like, I mean, not very far future, but like slowly we are getting better. We are getting more data. We understand the customer much better, and how their lifestyle changes, how their what things they like, and how we can make it better for them. And then when we go towards autonomous driving, full autonomous driving, let's say, this is going to be more like on a different setting. The change of mindset, the understanding of not only us, like who is in the car, but also pedestrians and everybody else around us. So this is like the well-being of everybody in in our environment, and not only inside the vehicle. So this is all comes from like the this flow of data, and using it in a way that we can help people in different ways.
Yeah, no, that's clear. Yeah, I like how it can indeed also, data can go in and out of the vehicle, and then communicate with other vehicles or infrastructure, buildings, traffic lights, you name it. There's a lot of potential there, and it's very exciting to kind of see where that's going. Henry, back to you. Especially, around again, your reimagination of infrastructure and then the urban planning. We talked about inclusivity there, but then what is the thinking around like our mental or physical well-being when it comes to the infrastructure and urban planning?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Look, I think urban planners, they are educated people, they are trained. I don't know to what degree they think about mental health and how their work impacts people. And specifically when it comes to their mental health. I think that, if you think about what mobility means, the ability to move around freely, I think as we reimagine what that means, it's not just physical barriers, but it's mental barriers as well. And I think that urban planners can consider that as they're designing what streetscapes and other forms of infrastructure can look like. I think that especially the public sector has a deeper responsibility to pay attention to those things. I also think that, we're now at a point where like mental health is part of the everyday public discourse. We can talk about it in ways that we couldn't before. So I'm sure there'll be studies and things like that to determine how this pandemic has impacted all of us, especially as urban planners seek to redesign our cities as a response to the recovery efforts. So I think there's no shortage of the ways in which we can go from here. But I do think urban planners need to take more responsibility as to how their work impacts the public. And I think it's up to their academic institutions to help them realize that.
Yeah, great. It's interesting you bring up the pandemic because, you know, especially in New York City where we're based, is what we see there is like obviously a lot less cars in the street. And you saw the streets being closed off for cars as a result, and a lot more people out and about, walking, biking, scootering, one-wheeling, you name it, so many modes of transportation. And I think that was really interesting to you know, obviously that has great effects for our well-being, mental health, being able to go out and explore and be a little bit more free there, not rely on cars so much. Because in the end, we don't always need to go from A to B. Sometimes we also just want to. Sometimes we just want to go out and explore, you know, refresh our brains a little bit, reset, or, you know, just find new places. So, you know, flipping it around like that, like what is the role of governments and policy and your work as an advisor in that sort of sense of exploration?
Yeah, I think so. Government has several roles to protect, to help enforce, to help create laws. I also but the risk there is like we don't want governments to overstep. We don't want them to overregulate, and I think that's the balance that that governments need to strike. I don't think you should leave it up to just governments to be thinking about these things. I think this is where, so look, my thesis is this: in order to solve these complex problems, you need a mix of the private, public, and nonprofit sectors. So I believe in many respects, some government responsibilities should be overseen by nonprofit or academic communities, just because they are less susceptible to the politics. And so that's the big piece here that we often don't talk about as either urban planners or engineers or designers. It's how politics plays a part in what our transportation infrastructure looks like. And so you need to sort of insulate some of these decisions from that. And often you can do that through nonprofits or through the academic sector. So, yeah.
Yeah, and is that like I remember when we talked earlier, you also mentioned how micromobility, for instance, as you know, an example of the private sector and startups, how they played a role in you know, making those neighborhoods more vibrant, more accessible to people, and then, you know, as a kind of looking at how the pandemic drove a little bit of that.
Yeah.
What do you see happening there in the near future?
So yeah, I think so. On the micromobility companies, I think that's just an example of a technology company recognizing the impact that it has and the benefits that can truly be derived from its technology. And we need to see a lot more of that. In many cases, unfortunately, we need to have government provide regulation to ensure that technology companies continue to think that way. But I do think companies like Bird have done a fantastic job of that. But speaking to my previous point, I think that, for example, NYU convened a group of autonomous vehicle experts who focus on New York City to think about ways in which more regulation could be promulgated for an eventual AV sort of landscape, right? So here you had a non-government entity working to establish a regulatory framework, and they could do so in a way that was insulated from the politics. Right. So I think that's one way of doing it. I would love to see more micromobility, more AV and other types of technology companies take on some of these responsibilities. But it's tough.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it is, but it's really interesting how these kind of parties can and should be working together, and you know, some are a little bit quicker to adopt things than others. But yeah, I mean, I think that the cool thing I see about micro mobility in particular is like enabling people to just go out and about and exploring their neighborhoods in other ways to make it a lot more vibrant, more neighborhoody, rather than going through it with our cars. And as a result, I think it makes it a little bit more livable. Might help like small businesses a lot more. And I think so. There's a lot of benefits to driving all that forward.
Yeah. So Jasper, I'd like to say something a little controversial.
Okay.
So I happen to like cars. I like cars.
You're not alone.
EVs, I like AVs. I think we just need to work on the mix. We need to figure out what the proper mix is. There's no question that transit is the best way to move people around urban dense areas. But I do think there's still a place for cars.
Yep.
I think that the way we've structured our investments is off, way off. 80% of federal funding goes to highways, while 20% goes to transit. And so you're funding 80% cars and 20% buses and subways. That makes no sense to me. But I'm not in favor of completely getting rid of the car. I think owning a car is very much American. But I do think that cities need to figure out ways in which to put people first and also find a balance with the cars as well, which is tough, not easy to do.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm fully with you. I mean, myself as well as two other people on this panel, I know are car enthusiasts, but I'm also a very avid advocate of urban cycling. I grew up in the Netherlands where we learned to cycle bike in traffic at 4 years age, and that's all we do. So I'm very much for cars. Just cities are just not the right place, especially when they get really dense.
Yeah.
And I would love to see cars still be around, especially looking at Pfizer, knowing that at some point we will have fully autonomous cars. And it's another point we do want to touch on. It's at some point when autonomous driving, we're looking far into the future now, will really become prevalent and is sort of the default. What will there still be the ability to drive our cars and explore, for that explorative behavior, to feel good, reset, refresh, go on this nice drive through the mountains? I know that's quite far away, but what is your perspective on that?
So I totally agree. It's actually for even me myself as a driver, I don't want to keep doing the things that I used to do. I can do that myself. So it's as I mentioned earlier, we try to provide a personalized experience and intelligent. And this doesn't mean that we only do the same, may help you do the same thing that you used to, but also we want to help you explore new things. And that means, it can be done in a lot of ways. One thing that let's say that we know you're going to work, so you care about traffic, so you want to avoid traffic. But if you're traveling, then you probably going on a nicer route, or going somewhere that is, it's not about traffic, but other things. So this is the understanding part, knowing what you like and what can we, how we can help you explore or experience new things. So if you are, if you want to order food, we know what kind of restaurants you would like to, you typically go to, but we can help you get food at any restaurant, somewhere close to where you are. Or if you're driving an AV, what is the best route to basically charge your vehicle, or the best time to do that? So these are the new things that you might be out of a little bit your comfort zone, but it could be a new routine, and could help you enjoy the drive and so many other things more.
Yeah, I love that. And I mean, routines exist for a reason, and they are, they have their place, but sometimes we do want to explore, and sometimes we don't want our navigation to take the fastest route or the shortest route. It's how about the funnest route, or, the one with the best view, or, the best air to breathe, or I don't know. I think it's really interesting to think about those things. Keith, kind of back to you again. So when it comes to like exploring, really, how does Wayband kind of contributes to its users and our human desire to really explore and break our routines?
Yeah, and so like so much of the like it's like while we're driving or if I send a text message, I'll get pulled over and I get a ticket, but if I look down at the map, like nothing happens, right? And that's because looking at the map is such a critical need in driving that you can't give people tickets for doing it, even though it's not necessarily the best way to get around. And so what we're finding is that like we're working really in the walking space and like so we're getting the people like in that last mile and in that personal kind of mode of transportation, really carrying themselves. And one of the things that we're looking at is one, like different pieces for our blind and visually impaired users. For example, on trash day, a bunch of trash piles show up and the whole geography of the street is now completely different. Or like, some scaffolding shows up and like now people are being rerouted to the street, right? Like for a blind person that shows up very much late in the game. So it's like, can we get information from other people walking, realizing that like, oh, hey, this user is blind and oh, it took them twice as long as it usually takes for them to walk this street. Maybe there's something going on here. Let's route the next user down a different street. Maybe it's a little bit longer, but it's more convenient and it's a bit safer, right? And so how can we build in? Like we were having conversations like, oh, like could you pick your route based on how much shade is on the side of the street that you have to walk down, right? Favorite restaurants and shops. And more importantly, what we do is because you're not buried in your phone while you're navigating with the Wayband, because all the information is getting delivered to you through your skin, you actually have the mental space and your eyes and ears are free to actually pay attention to what's going on around you. So now you can grab that bakery that you didn't notice before because you were constantly trying to look at your map. We feel that there are pieces that allow for not just people to have richer experiences, but like, potentially businesses to come and interject in those experiences around drawing in customers who happen to be walking in their area. And more importantly, we see like a very big part, which is like social travel. Like how many times do you travel somewhere alone? Like, like usually like there's a kid, there's a partner, there's a friend, you're meeting up, like there's a whole messaging, groups that people usually put together just to deal with like what we're going to do today, this week, this month with travel, right? So like, what if we could like put all that together and almost have like a social experience while traveling so that Waybands could connect to one another. One person could enter an address and everyone's Wayband gets the same address from no matter where you are. So we really see an opportunity to like integrate like socially, getting around and connecting those dots. And that's, I think, is something that we're really, really excited about and kind of like looking at what does the exploration mean now?
Yeah, that's fascinating how like rethinking how we move around the world and also just think about moving around in the world, not even before we even do it.
Yeah, and in our case, like one of the things that's I always kind of find it kind of funny is that basically we're at a space right now, like where our cars can like drive and park themselves, but the best way we figured out how to get a human from one place to another is to have them constantly stare at a screen or have some annoying person constantly talking in their ear. And like we just see like there's a better way to do this, and we haven't really needed a better way because everything has worked fine. But we really see an opportunity to reimagine what that might look like. And so yeah, it's a lot of fun to like really trying to like looking at, because all travel isn't for a utilitarian purpose. Sometimes I just want to go for a walk in a circle, which is like doesn't make sense from the non-computer point of view. So
exactly, yeah. Yeah, we're still humans after all. A quick reminder for everyone, if you do have questions or thoughts or any in particular questions for any of the panelists, feel free to drop that in the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And then we will save some time towards the end that we can ask the panelists directly. Actually, Keith, it's interesting you bring that up, and because in our earlier conversations, you said like we have 5 senses, right? But we only use 2 of them in most our technology when it comes around moving around in the world and our mobility. So what's your point of view on like how technology at large really should use like more of our senses, and how can haptics play a role in here?
Yeah, and so, like when one of the things that we've done is like we looked at, kind of like a research dollar spent, across the senses, and a few people have written white papers on it. And if you look, vision obviously has the most spending, right? And if you look around you with the number of visual peripherals that you're surrounded by, there's probably a phone, a computer screen, a TV, a watch, maybe another computer screen, a tablet, and who knows, like a Nintendo Switch maybe, right? There's enough peripherals just in your room right now to like feel more visual acuity than you have. And that's because we've done so much research. Sound is second, right? And so a lot of sound-based peripherals, half of those peripherals that have screens also have sound equivalents inside of them, right? And what does that mean from an accessibility point of view? It means that designing for visual and audio experiences is much more easy. It's much more accessible. There are tools and processes to do that. And there's a whole industry that supports that in very different ways, right? And now, so when we start to look at touch, smell, and taste, we kind of see from the digital, revolution side, these were kind of severely left out, right? And touch is a complex sense. Smell isn't necessarily easily reproducible digitally at this moment, even though there are amazing companies that are working both on smell and taste in the digital world, doing some amazing, fantastic things. The hardware and the peripherals aren't necessarily in space yet, but a good portion of those devices that I just mentioned also have haptic motors in them that are already embedded. Now, these motors were just designed to get your attention. They weren't really, most of them weren't really designed to do anything more than that. Like you have some exceptions. Apple has done some amazing work with their haptic engine. But from the most part, it's just meant to get your attention, right? It's kind of like a LED that's just meant to blink to show you that a light is on, right? But like with touch, if I kissed you or punched you in the face instantaneously, you would understand a lot of information. And I would need no words to communicate I might need words to communicate after, like why I kissed you or why I punched you, right? But instantaneously there's a feeling and then there's a reaction to that feeling. And so we see that touch has this ability to act at a much faster way and give a broader sense of information in a non-linear way. And how can we utilize that with the peripherals that are based to start expanding, that sense into the market? Because at the end of the day, especially like when we get to work with like the deafblind, like sight or sound is not an option. So it's like, if all you're doing is communicating everything through visuals and communicating everything through sound, then this whole population has no access to any of that information. And so I think the constant conversation in the community is really, we don't mind getting the information in a different way, but we want access to the same information that you do. It was like, you can see that there's an elevator here. I should know that there's an elevator here too. I don't need to see it, but like figure out a way to let me know. And right. That's the part where we're talking around is like equal access to information.
Yeah. No, I fully agree. That's well said. Yeah. And it's also about like making sure all those senses are used together, right? It's not one or the other is better. It's more like we have 5 senses, use them as product designers out there and companies, technologies. So that brings me also to Faiza. Like looking at like cars today, they're like devices, right? They're so complex inside, especially in the interior. So like how does Mercedes-Benz really engage with our sense of touch, but also other senses that we may not have talked about, like what Keith said, our sense of smell and taste are not really utilized that much. What is coming? What is the future there? And how does that sort of how is that used in your role at Mercedes-Benz?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, as you mentioned, we're in product design. They try to see how people have been using certain functionalities in the car, and then if they need to keep it or change it in a way that it would be more comfortable for the customer. So, I mean, the way that it is now, how they use the steering wheel, how they adjust the seat, or how they use the massage. So these kind of things, they need to touch either the manual, like let's say setting, or use the buttons to basically save the setting that they prefer to have. In the case of like user interface, a lot of models or like the basically AI system in the background works based on user interaction, and user interaction is usually by touching the interface, clicking on what we suggest to the customer in a given context. So this is also like a way of evaluating how things are working, or if it's something they like or not. So these are a few things in terms of interaction. Also, like for safety, we have to, even if they have like driver assistant option, lane keeping, for instance, if they're not, if their hands are not on the steering wheel for a certain period of time, they will get warning because it's a sign of distraction or I mean, although we have those safety options, but it's also the driver's engagement that matters. So these are for like basically touching, but also there are like new features like gesture recognition that there are certain things that you probably can't, I mean, might be too far for you to reach, or it might be distracting. So there are built-in gestures that you could enable to do certain things, for example, opening the windows or locking the doors. So these kind of things are more like on, I would say, on the vision side. For smell, I would say there are like certain models have this option that you could kind of like have more like a spa-like environment. So it's more like that stress level that I talked about. Right. So you set the lighting means the interior lighting, and also how it would feel like, how you want it to feel like. So yeah, these are a few things that I think would address different senses.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I like the examples of using haptics for also for safety, like warnings. And I believe it's in the seats as well to nudge people, like get your hands back on the wheel. Because kind of thinking about safety and mobility is of course a very big topic. It's very important. So kind of going back to what Henry mentioned earlier, especially around companies and governments working together, regulations around that's a well-known story around safety. And I think a big example here is like around self-driving, of course, and how Tesla has pretty freely, rolled out their self-driving or assisted driving features, and I think there was the perception of that technology, and then especially the safety around it, I think became quite a big public topic and problematic also. So Henry, can you talk a little bit about those challenges, like around the perception of safety, and how does that work around governments working with companies and regulations, and where that is going?
Yeah, I think so. A lot of AV companies or mobility companies in general, what they say is, safety is at the core of what they do. That's at the forefront of what they do. And I don't disagree, but I do think that the way we think about safety is flawed. I think we only think about safety in terms of car crashes, and it should be broadened in a number of different ways. But if we're specifically talking about autonomous vehicles, and then Tesla sort of comes into the conversation, even though they are not an autonomous vehicle company.
That's true. Yeah.
I think, the fact of the matter is, they have been dangerous in the way that they have approached this in terms of deploying their technology to the general public without adequate safety measures in place. For example, like they'll give you videos on how to operate the car, but don't do any sort of active training, even removing sort of the one-on-one engagement that you would have with a salesperson on how to use certain features. And I think there's a certain comfort level with Tesla's product, and when there just shouldn't be. It is flat out dangerous. So that's Tesla specifically, but I think the industry needs to do a far better job of educating. Number one, starting with the fact that Tesla is not an autonomous vehicle. There are a number of different associations out there that have sought to provide this education. In my opinion, I've found that those organizations mainly consist of people who are in the industry talking to themselves. And so now we're going back to this outreach and engagement. I don't find that they are actively seeking to educate the general public to level up their understanding of where we are with autonomous vehicles and why Tesla is different and needs to be approached differently. And then lastly, we come to the government. And I think for a long time, it was we were operating under this notion that government stakeholders, specifically policy people, specifically engineers, that they could not keep up with the technology and technology companies. But I think they have caught up. I think they now understand what they're dealing with. And they need to sort of step up their efforts to regulate and to educate. They need to do some of this education on their own. Funding often becomes part of the problem, and that's where we need more education to elected officials to allocate more funding for education. And I also think we need to focus on our young people. And bringing the education to the schools. When I was growing up, I learned that, you look both ways before crossing. I learned that at school. I think there are certainly some efforts, including in New York State, that they're making to provide this education, but I think a lot of that can be increased.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that you mentioned how we sort of rely on technology to keep us safe, but that might not always be what we think it is.
Yeah.
And Keith, I know we talked about this before, and you mentioned some things that really kind of made us think, and especially like, well, it's two-part. I think one part is your view on like GPS, and what that means to people. And like around its precision mostly. Yeah. And then also I think we started talking about the differences there that we see between generations. Like a Gen Zer today might look very differently at that dot on Google Maps than a Gen Xer, for instance. So can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, and so and I think this also too, like someone asked the question around some of the biggest pain points, and like one of the biggest challenges in urban environments, especially for navigating in general, is not necessarily a blind specific thing, but it deeply impacts people who are visually impaired, is the lack of GPS accuracy. And so what happens in an urban environment is we have this thing that's called the urban canyon effect. And ultimately, you need at least 3 or 4 satellites in the GPS constellation. I think there's somewhere between 27 that are flying around the world. So as long as you have 3 to 4 of them within range of you, you can get a sense of where you are on the earth. The challenge is that like you need access to the sky. That GPS signal is basically a whisper from space. So like clouds distort it, trees block it, it bounces off of buildings. And now when you're in this alleyway, you get a signal bouncing off the Empire State Building, hitting the ground and then coming to your device. And your device thinks that it was a straight line. So all that time gets added. And now your dot that should be, 5 meters, which is GPS resolution's quote unquote best at the moment, gets somewhere like you're somewhere in this 1 block area. And a lot of us have seen that when we've gotten out of the train. And then, on top of that, you're in a bunch of metal stuff. The magnetometers get screwed up. So then, when you get out the train, it tells you to walk in this direction. You walk for a half a block and realize that like you need to look like an idiot and come back and walk past the people that you just walked past because, the phone pointed you in the wrong direction. And so a lot of those are innate into the city, all the metal and the signals kind of bouncing around. We see companies that are definitely working on some of those challenges, but those are some of the biggest ones but we all, like Google, Apple, we all use the same GPS satellites at the moment. So that's kind of like ingrained. And another big piece is that a lot of places like sidewalks aren't accurately mapped. And so for our device, a user inputs their address or they push a pin on a map, or, we have this thing called What 3 Words where they can drop some kind of square code in and get navigated to a 3 by 3 meter square. Either way, we will get you to that point, But the thing is that we only know the routes that the mapping company provides us. And if the streets are the only things that are mapped, guess what the mapping company does? The mapping company draws a line in the middle of the road. Guess what our device does? Our device keeps you on the line that the mapping company draws, and most of our users, initially speaking, are blind and visually impaired. So you do that math, like they're huge liabilities. And so like we had to figure out ways to get the road out of the middle of the street and put it on a sidewalk, but it doesn't work because sidewalk with change, there are no standards, completely. And so by cities they change, by countries they change. So it's like, like having sidewalks more accurately mapped. And we're working on a lot of pieces around what does that actually look like. And we're hoping that, with the stuff that's going on in policy, like we grab maps from, like the city of Boston, New York City, they're better than the maps that, like some of the mapping companies have. And we're like, hey, how can we get this data into your map so that it's already there? And why do we have to be the ones to tell you that this data is better than the data that you have, And so I think that there's a policy piece around like making the maps better and like getting support on that. I think that there's like the autonomous vehicle piece, because like vehicles are already deeply scanning the environments, which are going to give a huge opportunity for, more autonomously mapping out of the cities and making sure these places are accurate. And we know GPS is getting better, technologies keep improving. And so, there's a trifecta that is emerging, but right now, we all have to deal with the challenges that those pieces are a little bit spotty.
Yeah. No, it's super interesting. Yeah, to combine all those things, especially cars driving around with so many sensors looking out, like grab it all up and merge it, combine it with what other sources are like. Okay, fascinating stuff. So we're almost at time. I want to open up the floor to the audience and look at Vasily, see what sort of questions we got from them, and yeah.
So we got a couple good ones, and I think I have an interesting challenge for Henry here. I want to combine two questions. One is from Christian and one is from Ed. So Christian is saying, well, do you think we're delaying important transit infrastructure changes by focusing too much on like electric autonomous cars as a solution? But if you look at the car prices and the pandemic, according to the DMV data, the number of vehicles purchased in urban areas has increased because of the pandemic and because of people's desire to have some freedom. So I guess the question is, how do you envision like micromobility, rideshare, and other things solving the Americans' need for convenience over like the sustainable cities?
Ooh, that is a challenging question. I'll take the first part of it. I think that the answer is yes, in that I think that our focus on EV infrastructure, EVs and AVs, does take away from, or it does delay sort of the focus on transit and other projects. I think, unfortunately, we cannot focus on too many things at once. And so transit has long been underfunded. And it is something that cities struggle with because they cannot pay for these rides. And the federal government, in my opinion, has long failed to really do the responsible thing here, because it's not politically sort of correct to call for more funding for transit. And as a result, there's attention on EV infrastructure, and it's sort of this shiny new thing. If I'm thinking about it from a sustainability perspective, EV infrastructure has to happen. There's just no question about it. But to answer the question, I do think the focus on EVs and AVs, we do lose something. And we do lose some of the things that we've been trying to address for a really, really long time. I think it's my hope that while we address EV infrastructure, we can also address these other challenges as well. And that goes back to what I'm talking about in terms of thinking about it as a mix. Whenever you focus on one thing, it has an impact on the other pieces of the pie. And that's how we have to be thinking about this. It has to be sort of comprehensive. So the other question about micromobility and how they play a role in terms of our communities, Look, I think I'm optimistic about what's happening in some of our cities. The open streets programs, I think, are great. I think there wasn't a fair amount of public engagement, while these things were happening. And so for some cities, there needs to be more engagement as to like why this is important. But it does open up the streets for micromobility, for walking, for biking in ways that we just haven't seen. And I think that's great to see. But what you do need is the federal government to sort of step up, not the federal, I'm sorry, the local governments to sort of own what they did and engage in a way that they probably haven't before. And what that means is really listening. And that's not an easy thing to do. It's people want to be heard. We talk about mental health, and look, it's all connected. People really want to be heard. And sometimes as a government stakeholder, you just have to listen. It's nothing for you to do right then and there, but you listen, you acknowledge, you understand, you seek understanding. And I'm kind of going on a tangent, but like what we're actually missing is like emotional intelligence when we think about these issues, and sort of self-awareness and thinking about the perspective of other users. And so I think that's what we need. So I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, I think it is a very difficult challenge of combining the two, of improving infrastructure and also trying to address some of the America's that needs for like the convenience. So I think it's going to be discussed further in the future as well. So I have one for Fajr. So do you think that autonomous cars, how can they be integrated into the cities? And is there a way that you see, or maybe you're already doing it, where like autonomous cars are interacting with things in the streets, utilizing some of the technology that's already out in the street? Red light cameras, maybe, something of that sort.
That's a great question. I mean, definitely. So it is the goal of autonomous driving is not only to make it easier for people to drive, but also safety. So reducing the traffic, reducing the number of accidents. And that means that we have to have the proper infrastructure, because in the long run, if we are going to have just autonomous cars on the roads, then they need to interact with each other. So one main challenge in the autonomous driving world is handling unpredictable behavior. And that means drivers with like regular cars, non-autonomous, and pedestrians. So we can, like with basically having more AD-driven infrastructure, we can handle the basically predict the behavior of other vehicles easier and better. And also communication not only with the other vehicles, but also with many other objects on the road, including traffic lights. So we don't only rely on vehicles detecting the traffic light and understanding what is the current status, but also a more reliable source of information through the traffic lights and many other things on the road. So it could be like road signs or changes on the road about, let's say, construction zones. So these kind of things are not always updated on the maps, which currently a lot of autonomous driving, like basically, I would say projects are relying heavily on. So reducing the basically the unpredictable parts and being able to focus more on the driving rather than handling these incoming, I think, problems or the errors that will happen always for even a human driver. So yeah, I mean, it's a combination of all of these things, and definitely that would be required. One last thing is to have a backup plan. And that's, I think, something that a lot of companies are investing in. And it's more like, what happens if the autonomous vehicle doesn't know what to do? So there should be a way to, for a human driver somewhere remotely take over and at least help the vehicle kind of like pull aside and do something that doesn't endanger the passengers.
I gotcha. Makes sense. I think there has to be collaboration in order for it to be kind of a better system. That's not really there now, but that's interesting. Jasper, do you think we have time for one more question?
Yeah, I think we can squeeze in one more if we keep it short.
Okay. Keith, I have one for you. You actually kind of already answered the question that was talking about the biggest pain point while kind of doing your research. But so I have one kind of a personal question, and I'm curious about like WearWorks. What was the flashpoint? I think you actually kind of touched on it earlier in discussion, but what was the flashpoint that kind of started Wayband? Like, how did that come about, and how, you know, to become where it is today?
Yeah. And so I have a background in mechanical engineering, handbag and shoe design, and industrial design. And so while I was getting my industrial design degree, you know, I left fashion, moved into industrial design because I was looking personally for a way to use design to help forward humanity. I love the fashion industry, but, you know, like with some of the challenges, you know, being the second largest polluter in the world, plus like the challenges we created around like body consciousness, or not we created, definitely propagated. You know, like it became like, is there a better way to use design that really forward humanity in a greater way? And so I went to school to figure that out. By the end of it, I missed fashion so much. I was in school trying to figure out how can I do this in a way that doesn't kill my soul. And I got really inspired by wearable technology. I was deeply inspired by movement. I was studying martial arts, my personal life. And so, you know, I was really, but I had lots of movement injuries. And so ultimately I spent my thesis trying to build a suit that would allow a person to download Kung Fu, and the suit would teach them using only vibrations. And when I just saw the Matrix way too many times. And, you know, like, and by the time, and when I graduated, you know, like it was a lot of challenges. It was like, you know, 3-dimensional movement, millimeter accuracy with millisecond precision all over the body, you know, wirelessly communicated in real time. It was like each of those could have been a startup. And so my co-founder actually had met a friend who came to talk in our school who was blind and visually impaired. He invited him to talk about accessibility design before it was a thing. And he just talked about his challenges of getting to the campus. We were at Pratt, beautiful, but, you know, not so easy and friendly campus to navigate if you're blind. And just kind of talked about his anxiety and the frustration that he was having just navigating. And so Kevin, my co-founder, had also worked in the haptic space and was like, hey, reached out to me and was like, what if we started a company trying to do some of the stuff you were doing with your Kung Fu suit, but did it with navigation instead? And I was like, actually, navigation seemed like it was easier at the time than Kung Fu was. I think I was wrong now. But, you know, like, and that was the way that we started, was like, okay, navigation. Because I was like, in my mind, I was like, you took this 3-dimensional problem and made it 2-dimensional. You took this millimeter accuracy problem and made it 5-meter resolution at best. You took this multiple points problem and made it 1 point. And you took an entire language that we would have had to create, moving all of your body to go straight, turn left, turn right, wrong way, you've arrived. And so really it was like navigation seemed like the baseline for creating a fantastic foundation to then expand into more complex forms of movement. Just had no idea that navigation would take this long.
Yeah, I can't imagine the challenges.
Yeah. Awesome.
All right, Jasper, back to you.
Cool. Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, well, this is the end of our Smart Salon. We're a tiny bit over time, but I do want to take a little bit of time to thank you all for joining today in the audience, and of course, as well as our fabulous panel over here. If you want to revisit the discussion or share it with others, we will be posting a recording on our website along with a summary in about a week. And I can announce that the next Smart Salon will be Tuesday, March 22nd at 5 p.m. The topic of that will be announced shortly, so follow us on all the social channels. You can sign up for updates and get access on our website, smartdesignworldwide.com. And yeah, I mean, that's it from here. Thanks again very much, Henry, Keith, and Faiza, for joining us today and sharing your points of views and chatting with us about mobility. I hope to see you again next time, and have a great night.
Thank you so much. Hey, Jasper, really quickly, I just want to throw a quick plea in to, like, if anyone is interested, please go to OpenStreetMaps and add sidewalks to your neighborhood. You help blind people and you help everyone. Thank you.
Fantastic. Drop a link in the chat while you still can, and we'll make sure to include that. Boom, there it is. All right, fantastic. Thanks, everyone.
Awesome, everyone. Cheers.
All right,
Cool.
take
Bye.
care.
Bye.